Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Theo Hickmat here. Friends call me Jason Zelda. Singer-songwriter. You'll find my music at jasonzelda.com. Feel free to check it out. I think you'll love some of the songs that I have there, including some of the new stuff that I'm using AI to songcraft songs, where I'm putting the song together, but I'm not necessarily singing. I have the AI doing the singing, and I just put the pieces together. It's amazing how these songs come out. Also, I'm the author of the interactive ebook, The Whistleblower's Lighthouse, a handbook for reaching Jehovah's Witnesses for Jesus. And you'll find that at my website, www.jasonzelda.xyz, jasonzelda.xyz. If you have trouble getting to the site, just go to a search engine, type in Whistleblower's Lighthouse, and you should be able to find it there as well. For those who've asked me to put my book on Amazon, I have scanned the pages of my book and made it into a Kindle for those of you who want to read my book as far as using the Kindle. Not very familiar with the Kindle, how it all works, but hopefully I did it right. Hopefully you guys will like what I put together there for the Kindle. On my website, by the way, my interactive ebook is available for a cost of anything you want to pay over $3. So if you want to pay $3, you can get the 500 plus page interactive ebook. If you want to pay $30, you want to pay $300, whatever you want to pay, you can pay whatever you want to pay at jasonzelda.xyz for my interactive ebook, and you'll be able to download it right then and there and begin to use it. It is interactive as well. I've used QR codes where you can use Google Lens to scan the codes, and it'll take you to video, it'll take you to audio, it'll take you to websites, it'll give you a lot more information about the things that I'm talking about. And I cover a whole lot of topics. I have a lot of questions in there. You can ask Jehovah's Witnesses to get them to think. I have a lot of documentation in there to back up the things, just like I do in my videos here, with a lot of documentation backing it up so that you guys can know I'm not making this stuff up. In the last video, I talked about two guys, Paul and Jeff, over at the Watchtower History channel. And I got a lot of comments from people asking me, where is this Watchtower History channel? And that led me to understand that a lot of people are not watching my videos. They're listening to my videos. Because if you were watching the video, you would have seen that on the screen, I put the Watchtower History channel's logo with the YouTube logo over top of it, so you could see it as a YouTube page. But for those of you who are listening to my videos, it's okay to listen to the videos, but when you have opportunity to watch the video, it's far more beneficial because I'm putting a lot of information on the screen to back up the things that I'm saying. So their page is located on YouTube. Just type in Watchtower History, look for the blue and white logo for the Watchtower History channel, and it'll take you right there. And they have hundreds of videos exposing the Watchtower. Both Jeff and Paul have never been Jehovah's Witnesses, but they have access to way more information than I do because they have access to newspapers, microfilm, audio, video, all kinds of stuff. And it's just amazing the amount of information they have over there. And I'm going to be gleaning some information from their work in my work. We've already agreed about that. And I'm hoping you guys will enjoy this. But the videos I'm putting together is in no wise a summary of what they have over there. The stuff they have over there is way more information than I have. So I hope you guys go and check it out. Watchtower History channel on YouTube. Let them know Jason Zelda sent you when you go over. Now, this is going to be video number 3 of the Hidden History of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society series. It's all part of the Hidden from Jehovah's Witness video series that I started 10 years ago in 2014. So we're going to continue to go on and reveal these things to you, let you guys know from someone who's never been a Jehovah's Witness but has researched their group for 30 years. Collected the information, and now I'm giving you the stuff that I've learned so I can finally set all this stuff aside and move on to other things, because you need the information. I just collected it all and I'm trying to get it out there to you. In the last video, we dealt with some of the characters in this play that took place during World War II and the Nazi Germany period. I wanted to introduce you to some of the people who were involved in what was going on. So we talked about Rutherford. And we went all the way back to the early days of the Jehovah's Witnesses before Rutherford had even become a member of the cult. And in their early literature, when they were calling themselves the International Bible Students Association, they told their people that Rutherford was born into a Baptist family, but he didn't like what the King James Bible had to say because he would have been raised on this King James Bible. But he didn't like what this King James Bible had to say. He mainly didn't like the doctrine of hell. And because he didn't like the doctrine of hell, he decided not only was he going to abandon the book, but he was going to abandon God altogether, and he became a full-blown atheist. And we talked about that in video number 1, where the Jehovah's Witness leaders admitted that Rutherford had become an atheist. Now, Rutherford is not a case of an atheist who saw the light and became a Christian. That's not what happened. He never saw the light. He began as an atheist. He continued to be an atheist. Even after he joined the cult, he didn't become a believer in God. What did he do? He took over Charles Taze Russell's religious group and made it his own religion, changing the rules that Russell had into his own rules. And I mentioned to you from my interactive ebook, The Whistleblower's Lighthouse, that the teachings that Jehovah's Witnesses are taught, they're told that these teachings are Christian. But when you compare Jehovah's Witness teachings with the teachings that we've been teaching as Christians for nearly 2,000 years, you learn that what the Jehovah's Witnesses are taught is 180 degrees the opposite of what we Christians have taught for almost 2,000 years. They are taught the 180 degree opposite of what we're taught. We're taught that Jesus is God. They say he's not. We're taught Jesus died on the cross. They say he didn't. We're taught there's a hell. They say hell is just a grave. We're taught that when a Christian dies, they go to heaven. They teach only 144,000 go to heaven. The rest have to stay on a paradise earth. We teach that your sins are forgiven by the grace of God. You cannot earn it through religious activity or good works. They teach that the only way to satisfy their God is through a bunch of religious activity, mainly doing things for their particular religious organization. We teach you can pick up this King James Bible, read it and understand it, understand the purposes of God, understand his nature, the whole 9 yards, and what he requires of us. Jehovah's Witnesses are taught you cannot understand the Bible on your own. They're taught they need a group of elite men in New York to explain the Bible to them. We are taught that God represents himself to us as Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, commonly known as the Trinity. Jehovah's Witnesses are taught that the Trinity is a doctrine of the devil. The list goes on and on and on, that they are taught the opposite of what we Christians have taught for nearly 2,000 years. So how can their religion be Christian? And one of the things that I brought out in the last video, since Rutherford was an atheist, his foundation was atheism, how is an atheist going to bring you the true Christian religion? How does that work? When an atheist by nature doesn't believe there's a God in the first place. How is he going to bring you the true Christian religion if he's an atheist and doesn't believe this book? He can't. And he didn't. And Jehovah's Witnesses are lied to by their leaders when they are told that their religion is Christian. It is not Christian. It's anti-Christian. And even their leaders spell it out that their religion is anti-Christian because in their writings, in their speeches, and their videos, they spell out that the number one enemy of the Jehovah's Witnesses is who? What group of people? Christendom. Christendom is always their target. One of the definitions of Christendom is the worldwide body or society of Christians. Their number one enemy is the Christians. And what would you expect from a religion put together by a man whose foundation was atheism? He put together the perfect anti-Christian religion and coded it in Christian colors and terminology. We talked about another character, one of the guys that Rutherford latched onto, a man by the name of William Jennings Bryan. William Jennings Bryan was a super famous politician back in the days of Rutherford. He was Attorney General of the United States, and he was running for President of the United States. He was a member of the Populist Party back then, which was tied to the Democrat Party. And Rutherford was doing all he could to try to help this guy get elected. He would go out and do speeches for him. Rutherford was appearing at the Democrat convention with this man. Rutherford even going as far as dressing like the man. That very famous Time magazine article called California Cults, where they're talking about Rutherford putting together his own cult called Jehovah's Witnesses. They even spelled out that Rutherford, long after William Jennings Bryan had died, is still dressing like William Jennings Bryan, even wearing the black bow tie or wearing the bow tie. He wanted to find a replacement for his dad, so he latched on to this guy. But William Jennings Bryan has some serious issues, as we mentioned in video number 1, such as his ties to the Ku Klux Klan. He was so tied in with the Klan that when he died, the Klan, remember back then there's no social media, there's no Facebook, there's no internet, there's none of the technology we have today. Yet the Klan was able to gather their people together and get them to Washington, D.C. and have this huge organized march of Klansmen in their full gowns and hoods and the whole 9 yards in celebration of William Jennings Bryan, Rutherford's father figure. I also mentioned these ideas of William Jennings Bryan began to rub off onto Rutherford. Another person who Rutherford really wanted to get close to was Henry Ford. Now, in my last video, I had mentioned that in the book Vindication, Rutherford was asking Ford to read his book. Actually, if you look at the picture I put on the screen, it was actually in the Golden Age magazine of the Jehovah's Witnesses that Rutherford was asking Ford to read his book Vindication. I wanted to clear that up for those of you who might have been looking in Vindication and couldn't find the quote. If you looked at the screen, you would have saw that I had the Golden Age magazine and then the Vindication book here. And it's the Golden Age magazine where he's saying that he wants Henry Ford. It's highlighted where he wanted Henry Ford to read his Vindication book. The Vindication books is where Rutherford began to change the Jehovah's Witnesses' doctrines concerning the Jewish people. And we're going to deal with that a little bit down the road. Very important because we're dealing with Rutherford because the majority of the teachings that Jehovah's Witnesses have today came from him. It didn't come from their founder. It came from him. When you understand where he came from, then you can understand why he created such a diabolical religion that has destroyed so many of your families and divided you from friends that are in the group and is so anti-Christian. You'll understand why once you start seeing the pieces of the puzzle coming together. The second person that Rutherford really wanted to get the attention of was Henry Ford. Henry Ford of the Ford Motor Company was extremely famous, extremely rich, and Rutherford wanted to get in the orbits of these men who were influential, rich, powerful men of his day because he wanted to be seen as an influential, rich, powerful man because he was now in charge of Charles Taze Russell's Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and he was going to convert it into his own group. Change their name, strip them completely away from Charles Taze Russell, and make them into Rutherford's Witnesses. He'll call them Jehovah's Witnesses after a name that was presented in a book by Charles Taze Russell. I think it's called Thy Kingdom Come. In his book, Charles Taze Russell, while doing measurements on the Great Pyramid, encountered a man by the name of Robert Mendez. And Robert Mendez said that he believed that the Great Pyramid was Jehovah's Witness of truth on the earth. And it's in quotes, if I'm not mistaken, in the book. And I can put it on the screen for you. And I think that's where Rutherford got the name from. But he gave no credit to the man who actually came up with the term. Because as I mentioned again in the last video, Rutherford was not an original kind of guy. He was a copycat. He doesn't come up with his own ideas. He'll take your ideas, claim they're his, and take all the credit for it. That's what he did with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. He didn't build this organization. He let Charles Taze Russell build it. He let Russell make it big. He let Russell make it famous. And then as soon as Charles Taze Russell died, boom, Rutherford comes in, sweeps in, takes over the group, changes the rules, changes the name, and makes it his. And racks up a lot of money in the process. Because the members are out there. Remember I told you, back then they sold the literature. They sold their literature from the days of Charles Taze Russell until 1989 when the government made them stop selling it because they weren't paying taxes on the profits they were making. But they sold their literature back then, and Rutherford made a lot of money because all these Jehovah's Witnesses are out here. They're thinking they're doing all this work for God. They're actually doing the work for Rutherford. And they would go out and they'd sell this literature door to door and on street corners. And at the end of the day, they have to turn that money in. And that money goes back to Rutherford. And he gets to live in a big mansion, driving big cars, go up to Europe whenever he wants to go, travel whenever he wants to go, and be, Mr. Big Shot, hanging out with these politicians and various other people to try to get into their orbit because he wanted to be rich and famous, and he managed to become rich and famous at the expense of the members who were out there going door to door in the heat and the cold and the rain and all this stuff because they thought they were doing what they were doing for God. Well, in the case of Henry Ford, again, a very rich, powerful, influential man of his day, Rutherford really wanted to get Henry Ford's attention. But one of the things about Henry Ford was that he was a very, very well-known anti-Semitic man. He hated Jewish people. And this was going to rub off on to Rutherford over time as he began to associate himself with these men, and their views began to wash off on him because he's not an original guy, he's a copycat. He copies other people's stuff. With Henry Ford, I mentioned in the last video, as I'm getting you guys caught up as to where we're going, Henry Ford had his own newspaper called the Dearborn Independent. He also had his own printing presses, so he could print whatever he wanted, books, magazines, pamphlets, whatever he wanted. He owned a printing press. So on his printing presses, he would publish his Dearborn Independent newspaper, and in his paper, he would put some anti-Semitic things in there. He would attack the Jewish people, anti-Jewish conspiracy theories he would promote in his newspaper and so forth. And other books he was publishing on his presses were books like The International Jew, which was another book that attacked the Jewish people. Another book that he would print was called The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, the short name of the Protocols of Zion. Another book that came out of Russia that attacked the Jewish people and made the people who read the book think that the events that were happening in the book were supposed to have actually happened when they actually didn't happen. And this book, The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion, became so popular and so damaging that Jewish people were getting attacked by people who were reading this book and believing the lies that are in the book. This book became super influential, and there always seemed to be more and more and more people who were willing to reprint that book and reprint that book and reprint that book and keep that book going, age after age, decade after decade, keeping that lie going. Even to the 1980s, the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, giving a speech, had to take some time to try to squash this and put an end to it. And in one of his speeches, he took the time to warn people about this book, The Protocols of the Learned Elders of Zion. And I want you to listen to what President Ronald Reagan had to say concerning this evil book that was used by so many to turn people against the Jewish people. I want you to hear what Ronald Reagan had to say, and we're going to come right back.
This necessary subject. It will examine the nature and meaning of the continuing curse that is anti-Semitism. I think all of us here are aware of those, even among our own countrymen, who have dedicated themselves to the disgusting task of minimizing or even denying the truth of the Holocaust. This act of intellectual genocide must not go unchallenged, and those who advance these views must be held up to the scorn and wrath of all good and thinking people in this nation and across the world. And yet, just as we must challenge it here at home, so too we must challenge anti-Semitism abroad. We know that in certain nations, an infamous and fraudulent document called the Protocols of the Elders of Zion is still being distributed and in some cases taught in school. This, the most profoundly cynical piece of anti-Semitic filth ever produced, is full of libels toward the Jewish people, particularly the horrifying blood libel. We must send the message out to all the world. A blood libel against the Jewish people is a blood libel against all humankind, and no decent person will stand for it.
So now you've heard from the President of the United States. That's how high the book went, where the President had to address it and warn people about it, that it was a forgery and a fraud, and to stop believing what's in this book. But this book was very influential in Rutherford's day. We got Henry Ford, who's piping out all this anti-Semitism in books, in his newspaper. And what he didn't know was that a young man in Germany was taking Henry Ford's writings and having them translated into German so that he could read it. And he was believing all of this anti-Jewish nonsense that Henry Ford was piping out. Henry Ford would identify the Jewish people and claim that they were a problem in the world. And this young man in Germany reading this nonsense from Henry Ford was believing the lies. This young man's name, as you all know, is Adolf Hitler, who grew up to be the Chancellor of Germany, who then had the power to go and do something about the so-called problem that had been fed to him over the years by Henry Ford. Now we get into the next part. Who else was influencing? Who? Who was Hitler's influences? Who was Adolf's influences? We already talked about Henry Ford. But there was a lady who was also a heavy influence of Adolf and the Nazi Party. And her name was Margaret Sanger. Some of you, that name rings a bell. You've heard that name before. Margaret Sanger. Margaret Sanger lived from the late 1800s to the middle 1900s, and her influence in the world is still alive today, for the worst. She believed in a teaching known as eugenics. What is eugenics? Eugenics is a philosophy that pretty much teaches that the human race is contaminated and needs to be purified. Now, it always amazes me how people who love death don't want to call death death. They want to give it a nice, pretty name that people will be willing to accept. So, under eugenics, their philosophy was there were people who were fit and people who were unfit. But their definition is basically there are those who are fit to live and those who are not fit to live. You have to know how they speak. Margaret Sanger believed heavily in this eugenics idea, and she had a hatred of human life, a complete disregard for certain humans. She believed in this concept of those who are fit, those who are not fit. I want to read for you a bit from the eugenics platform, some of the things that they have taught. I got a lot of paperwork here down on the desk, a lot of stuff here, a lot of papers and things, but I'm not going to bore you. I want to inform you. This may end up being a controversial video because I'm going to be showing you guys some things in a few moments that you might consider as controversial. But if you really want to understand why the Nazis were so evil, how it is that they could just round up people that had done nothing to them, innocent men, women, and children, round them up and just kill them off and feel no remorse about it whatsoever. If you want to understand how they got that kind of a mindset, this video is going to help you see where it came from. Because this eugenics issue that Margaret Sanger believed in, when you take it to the obvious next level, you get what the Nazis did. Margaret Sanger believed that there were people who were fit to live and people who were unfit to live. The Nazis believed there were people who were fit to live and people who were unfit to live. And because they were the government in charge, they had the power to do something about the people who they felt was unfit to live, and killed people by the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions, and felt no remorse about it. Margaret Sanger believed that there could be a Superman race. Now, when she talked about Superman, she's not talking about the Man of Steel with the blue and red outfit and the big S on it. That's not the Superman she's talking about. She's not talking about humans with superpowers. When she used the term Superman, she's talking about a master race. She believed that if you weed out the people who she considers as unfit, prevent them from reproducing, that within a generation or so, you'll be left with only the supermen, the purest quote unquote people. And we saw where that road led in Germany, didn't we? Because the Nazis were also trying to get their Superman. They were trying to create the master race by doing what? Killing off the people who they considered as unfit. Who did they get this idea from? These are some of the things that were said by the eugenics movement during Margaret Sanger's time. This here is an article that you'll find here, and I blew it up big so I can read it. It says, immigrant weeds on California levees. Now I want you to watch how the eugenics movement plays around with the language, because they'll first start talking about actual weeds like that grow in your lawn, and then they're going to switch it over to talking about what they call human weeds. And just like you would go out in your yard and you'd feel no remorse whatsoever by reaching down and grabbing that weed and tossing it away, they want you to have that same kind of viewpoint when it came to what they called human weeds. So look at how they do the transition here. It says, immigrant weeds on California levees. The authorities in California weeds say the main reason for cultivating annual crops are A, a land preparation for planting, B, keeping down weeds in vineyards and orchards in principle, if not the sole purpose of cultivating is weed control. Average California estimates the cost of such cultivation land tillage has been 1/12 crop or $40 million annually. This exclusive of eradicating weeds in ditches, roadways, wastelands near the cultivated areas. In East Europe, your editor found a market woman earning 12 cents daily. She spent 4 hours daily walking to and from said work. 65 years old, she had yet to see her first motion picture. This is near Coley wages. Such folks usually test low mentally. Hardly are good seed stock for future Americans. And the next sentence says, they really are human weeds. They classify her as a human weed. What do you do with weeds? Here's some more. Another article here called Airplane Speed and Weed Control. Again, they're going to play around with the language. They'll start talking about actual weeds that grow on the ground and then switch it over to what they call human weeds. They're going to do it again. The highlighted section, put it on the screen so you can see it. It says, does it not also accelerate progress in the eternal struggle of seeds against the weeds? As we now eliminate undesirable plants, can we similarly eliminate undesirable human strains? Do you see how they do a transition here? Does not Denmark, in eugenically card indexing all citizens, lead mankind herein? So they're going to use Denmark and what they do over there as the example. Let's go to the next highlighted section and see what it says here. If marriage licenses be denied to those whose children can be expected to be defectives, can we not expect race improvement? Would this not parallel Iceland's first to become 100% literate? This, when Iceland denied marriage licenses to morons lacking mental ability to learn to read and write. They classify those who are poor or illiterate as the weeds that need to be pulled out of the human garden. And these are the philosophies that Margaret Sanger had embraced. These are the philosophies that the Nazis had embraced. Let's read one more. I don't want to overwhelm you with too much here. But this just gives you an idea of what the eugenics movement taught, because this is what Margaret Sanger believed. And we're going to get into some of the stuff she had to say that's being hidden from the American people and the rest of the world who are for the movement that she really got rolling. A lot of people have no idea what this woman actually taught and believed because it's kept hidden from them. This one here is called Recommended Reading, also part of the eugenics pamphlets. And it says here, in Barbados, an agricultural tropical island without weeds, again, they're talking about the plant that grow in the ground, Scientific Monthly, October 1950, Scientific Monthly, October 1950, occurs these words: weeding is carried on entirely by hand. Weeds never are allowed to seed. Is it not same well worth study by human genetics? Also eugenics students who are studying human weeds. The eugenics movement, dehumanizing humans so that people will feel fine just weeding them out later. And the Nazis jumped on board this with both feet. Margaret Sanger, it's a foundation. Her eugenics movement that she pushed, it's a foundation behind what's about to unfold. She's a foundation. She's upheld today by the Democrat Party in America as a hero. Up until a few years ago, every year there will be an award given out, the Margaret Sanger Award. Well, let's take some time to find out more about this lady. Before you celebrate her, let's find a little bit more about her. Here's an article here. Intelligent or unintelligent birth control. Now, when you hear a title like this, what do you think? Intelligent or unintelligent birth control? An editorial from American Medicine. What do you think when you think intelligent or unintelligent birth control? Do you think that it means using birth control wisely? Smartly using birth control? Let's see what they actually mean by intelligent or unintelligent birth control. Put it up on the screen at the highlighted portion, please. This is from, let's see here. This is from Margaret Sanger's newspaper. She had her own paper called the Birth Control Review. In this May 1919 edition of her newsletter, she felt the need to include this editorial from American Medicine, which says, "More children from the fit, less from the unfit. That is the chief issue in birth control. The emphasis is on control rather than prevention." Let me read that again. Matter of fact, now that we've read the highlighted portion, let's go back up so nobody can see I'm taking it out of context, and let's read from the top of the page to the end of the highlighted section. Because I got no reason here to try to deceive anybody. I could keep my mouth shut and just go on about my life and play my video games and move on with life. But I'm sticking my neck out here dealing with this controversial topic because this is a topic that really helped motivate things that were going on back then, that ultimately got the wheels rolling for a lot of the persecution that happened back then. And if you don't know what led up to it, and you just jump into it, you're going to be missing a lot of stuff that happened that led up to what ended up happening. One of the influencers was Margaret Sanger. You have to understand about Margaret Sanger, her background, her history, her eugenics, the stuff that she pushed, the stuff that she promoted, because it's still going on today. And because it's still going on today, what happened back then can happen again. Let's start at the top of the page. It said the advocates of birth control lean toward this method, and their efforts to clear the family track of economic, social, and health obstacles are too often not sufficiently recognized. Hence the popular apprehension that they encourage small families. The truth is that they encourage small families where large ones would deem detrimental to society. But they advocate with just as great an insistence large families where small ones are an injustice to society. They frown upon the ignorant poor whose numerous children brought into the world often under the most unfavorable circumstances are a burden to themselves, a menace to the health of the not infrequently unwilling mother, and an obstacle to social progress. But they frown with equal disapproval on the well-to-do, cultured parents who can offer their children all the advantages of the best care and education, and who nevertheless selfishly withhold these benefits from society. More children from the fit, less from the unfit. That is the chief issue in birth control. The emphasis is on control rather than on prevention. Margaret Sanger pushed birth control, birth control, birth control, birth control, birth control, birth control. But not that everybody should get it. She wanted these unfit ones mainly to take birth control. And the fit ones, who she considered fit, to continue to have babies. With the ones she classified as unfit, if you don't have a baby, well, your family tree is done in a generation. While those over here having kids, their family trees continue. They wanted the poor people out of the way and gone, so that all that's left is the well-to-do. She says here, more children for the fit, less for the unfit. But what you're going to see as we continue to look through the stuff she said, it wasn't just less kids for the unfit, it was no kids for the unfit. Let's keep going. Another article from her birth control review, November 1921, page 2, Eugenics and Birth Control. Margaret Sanger, Eugenics and Birth Control. Highlighted section here. At present, any woman ignorant enough to have unlimited children, she may be feeble in health, a hater of children, a nervous wreck, the most unwilling, the most insufficient of mothers, still she breeds. And why? Look at how she talks about poor people. She talks down about them. She dehumanizes them. Look at the next highlighted section at the bottom. God speed the day when the unwilling mother, with her weak, puny body, her sad, anemic, unlovely face, and her dependent whine will be no more. In that day we shall see a race of American thoroughbreds, if not the Superman. What did she just say? God speed the day when the unwilling mother, with her weak, puny body, her sad, anemic, unlovely face, and her dependent whine will be no more. What does that mean? When they're dead and gone. Because once these people who Margaret Sanger didn't like, who the eugenics movement didn't like, if their birth control plan had worked within a generation, the only ones that would be left would be the so-called elite. Everybody else would be gone because they would have birth controlled their way out of existence. They would not have had kids. And she says here, she wanted a race of American thoroughbreds. A race. Not races of thoroughbreds. A race of thoroughbreds. And not supermen, no, the Superman from one race. This is Margaret Sanger in her own words. Let's take a listen to what Margaret Sanger had to say and how she downgrades human beings. Take a listen.
Do you believe in sin? When I say believe, I don't mean believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
Margaret Sanger is the lady who is responsible for the organization known as Planned Parenthood. And it's kind of weird, ironic if you will, that the Planned Parenthood organization is like the #1 provider of abortions. But in some of Margaret Sanger's writings, she would write against abortion. She's playing both sides. She's playing both sides. You just heard Margaret Sanger say that the greatest sin to her is people bringing children in the world that has little chance of being human. Go back and listen to it again. If a child that's brought in the world is not human, what exactly is it? She's talking about a child that's already born. She also gave the assumption that in her viewpoint, these people are criminals from birth. Again, just go back and listen to what she said. The organization she put together, Planned Parenthood, is a huge provider of abortions. And if I was to ask you, what is the procedure for a surgical abortion? What's the procedure for a first trimester abortion? That's an abortion that is done within the first to third or fourth month. What is the procedure for a second trimester abortion, abortion between the fourth and seventh month of pregnancy? What's the procedure for a third trimester abortion from the 7th to the 9th month of pregnancy? And yes, they do happen. What's the procedure? Well, since we're talking about Margaret Sanger and we're talking about Planned Parenthood, we have to talk about abortion, since abortion is one of the ways that they're moving forward with her agenda. We're going to take a few moments and take a look at an abortion doctor performing a first trimester abortion, a second trimester abortion, and then explaining what a third trimester abortion is. That way, when somebody talks about abortion, you will have seen one and know exactly what it is. And then we're going to come back and deal with Margaret Sanger a bit more to get into her mind and find out why she thought that something like this was perfectly fine to do to the children of people that she felt was unfit to live.
Now let's see what abortion does to this, our second patient. We have then the 12-week unborn child in the uterus being this muscle surrounding the child. When the abortionist commences the procedure, he will first place this instrument, which is known as a speculum, into the woman's vagina, and will then open it in order to visualize the cervix, the neck of the womb, here. Having visualized the cervix, the abortionist then takes this instrument, which is known as a tenaculum, and fastens it securely through the speculum onto the cervix in this manner, clamping shut the tenaculum and getting a firm grasp on the cervix. The next instrument which is brought into play is called the sound. This instrument is then introduced into the uterus, and it is then removed, the abortionist having ascertained exactly how deep and in fact how large the uterus is. And then this set of dilators, these metallic curved instruments, are used to effect the opening of the cervix in order to introduce, finally, the abortion instruments themselves. The abortionist first introduces the most slender of these instruments into the cervix to dilate the cervix, turns the instrument around to a slightly larger end, introduces that end, and then works his way through the various graduated, increasingly larger ends of this dilating instrument. He will then take the instrument known as the suction apparatus, which is opened. It is in a sterile container prior to the actual use of the instrument. And then this will be inserted through the dilated cervix up into the uterus and will then puncture the sac surrounding the child, allowing the amniotic fluid to escape. The instrument then will come into direct contact with the child, and with a pressure of approximately 55 or so millimeters of mercury applied to the end of this instrument as it is attached to a long, thick suction tubing at this end and to the abortion instrumentation, that is the machine at the other end. The suction tip will begin to tear the child apart. The pieces of the body are torn away one by one until finally all that remains are shards of the body and the head itself. The head will be too large to come through this instrument itself. This will necessitate the introduction of this instrument, called a polyp forceps, into the uterus through the already dilated cervix, and the abortionist will then attempt to grasp the free-floating head of the child in the uterus between the rings of this instrument. The head is then crushed, the contents of the head removed, and finally the bones of the head. And the abortion is then effectively at an end. Now, for the first time, we're going to see a film made with real-time ultrasound imaging of a 12-week abortion. Bear in mind that this is not an unusual instance, a late abortion. This is one of the 4,000 or so a day done every day in the United States. Now, let's turn to the actual film itself. We are now looking at a sector scan of a real-time ultrasound imaging of a 12-week unborn child. The child is orientated in this direction. You are looking now at the head of the child here, the body of the child here, and this image is the child's hand approaching its mouth. Looking a little more closely at the child, we can discern the eye, or the orbit of the eye, here, the nose of the child here, the mouth of the child here, and we can even look at the ventricle of the brain here. This is a fluid-filled space in the brain. We see the body of the child here with the ribs in silhouette and the spine of the child at the back. This rather granular area of tissue at the top of the sector appears to be the placenta, or afterbirth, of the child. And we can begin to see down here the thighs, the lower extremities of the child, coming off the body in this manner. Now, let's move to the action. We now see the heart beating here in the child's chest. The heart is beating at a rate of approximately 140 a minute. And we can see the child moving rather serenely in the uterus. One can see it shifting position from time to time. It is still orientated in this manner. And the mouth is receiving the thumb of the child. The child, again, is moving quietly in its sanctuary. Now, this shadow, which we are seeing down at the bottom of the screen, is the suction tip. We have colored the suction tip deliberately in order for you to discern it more clearly. But the abortionist has now dilated the cervix and is now inserting this suction tip, which you can see moving back and forth across the screen. You will note that as the suction tip, which is now over here, moves toward the child will rear away from it and undergo much more violent, much more agitated movements. The child is now moving in a much more purposeful manner. Its orientation changes from time to time. It is rearing again here. Now, the suction tip has not actually touched the child, even though the child is extremely agitated and moving in a violent manner. The child has now moved back to the profile view, and the suction tip is flashing once again across the screen. The child's mouth is now open, and we will see that again on a freeze frame in a moment. But this suction tip, which you can see moving violently back and forth on the bottom of the screen, is the lethal instrument which will ultimately tear apart and destroy the child. It is only after the fluid has been broken, the sac has been disrupted, that the tip will actually come against the child. But we can see the tip moving back and forth as the abortionist seeks the child's body. Once again, we see the child's mouth wide open in a silent scream in this particular freeze frame. This is the silent scream of a child threatened imminently with extinction. Now, the heart rate has speeded up dramatically, and the child's movements are violent at this point. It does sense aggression in its sanctuary. It is moving away. One can see it moving to the left side of the uterus in an attempt, a pathetic attempt, to escape the inexorable instruments which the abortionist is using to extinguish its life. Now, the heart has again perceptibly speeded up. We can time this at approximately 200 beats per minute, and there is no question this child senses the most mortal danger imaginable. The membrane has now been punctured, and the fluid has escaped. One no longer sees that large reservoir of fluid surrounding the child. But once the fluid has been drained off, the suction tip has now been firmly clamped to the child's body, and the child is being pulled in a downward direction by the abortionist's suction tip with the negative pressure applied to it, and the body is now being torn systematically from the head. The head of the child being in this direction here. I am now outlining the child's head. The lower extremities have already been lost, and we see the suction tip flashing from time to time in the screen as a typhoon-like series of echoes, and the child is being tugged back and forth as the suction tip has now been applied to the body, and the abortionist is exerting his traction on the child in this manner. The child's head is still discernible here. The body is no longer discernible. It has now been torn from the head. What we see now is the head itself with what is called the midline echo of the head and the spicules or fragments of bone. Now, this head, which I'm outlining here, on this 12-week child is simply too large to be pulled in one piece out of the uterus. The abortionist is going to have to employ this instrument, the polyp forceps, in an attempt to grab the head. The abortionist will attempt to crush the head with this instrument in this manner and remove the head piecemeal from the uterus. We now see intermittently the shanks or blades of this instrument appearing in the image here. The head tends to float freely in the uterus. Here are the shanks or blades of the instrument coming across here. And the head is now being locked on by this polyp forceps, and the head is being pulled down toward the cervix. Now, all we see remaining are simply the shards, the broken fragments, the pieces of tissue which document that there was once a living, defenseless, tiny human being here. Late abortion has become so frequent that there are actually textbooks written about it, detailing the techniques, and in addition, there are articles written on the subject. Here is an article which indicates that the author studied at least 700 women who had had third trimester abortions between the 7th and the 9th month, and states the following: dilatation and evacuation, a procedure which we will discuss in just a moment, has been proposed as the treatment of choice for women seeking abortion in the third trimester of pregnancy. D&E, dilatation and evacuation, is the procedure used to accomplish late abortion in the second and third trimester of the pregnancy. In this procedure, a laminarium, this device, is placed into the cervix, the neck of the womb, the night before. This is simply a piece of seaweed which swells up during the night, and in swelling up, opens up the neck of the womb, so that the next morning, when the woman is brought to the operating room and put under general anesthesia, the neck of the womb, the cervix, is already partially dilated, and the cervix is further dilated with instruments of this sort. This instrument is placed up into the cervix, the neck of the womb is further dilated, and even instruments like this are used to accomplish dilatation sufficient to allow breaking of the bag of water, and then the introduction of this grasping instrument, an instrument which can locate the child in the uterus and crush and destroy it. The patient is being prepared for the procedure. The fetoscope, the fiber optic instrument through which we will observe this abortion, as it begins in a swirl of blood. The forearm. Note the blood vessels running under the delicate skin. The hand and the fingers. This thick blue coiled structure is the umbilical cord. This is the child's lifeline to the mother. This was a little boy. The ear is readily identifiable. It has been shown that in the later months of pregnancy, the child will react to sound. The nose. Here is the mouth. This little fellow can be seen swallowing water. The eyebrows. The eyelids are still closed. These are the tools of the abortionist's trade. In a few moments, this little boy's life will be summarily extinguished with these instruments. The cervix has been sufficiently dilated, and the bag of water is broken. The umbilical cord has been severed, the lifeline cut and collapsed. Now it is being wrenched free of the child's body. And now the abortionist is reaching into the uterus with the grasping instrument to dismember the child. Piece by piece, the extremities are pulled away, then portions of the back, the spine, and the torso. A portion of the chest and abdominal wall has been torn from the body. The ribs are easily identified. Can anyone doubt this child has experienced an unimaginable agony? Pieces of the torso are being removed, and the parts are stacked on the table to the side of the abortionist in preparation for reassembling the child to assure that the abortion has been complete. In this pathetic pile of human rubble, we can discern a leg with the foot still attached. The head is located, and having been located, is grasped in the jaws of the clamp. The clamp crushes the head, and the head is then removed in pieces. The crushed head has now been removed, and the white matter of the brain has spilled out. After the procedure has been completed, this instrument, a curette, is introduced into the uterus. This curette is used to scrape out all the fragments and the shards of the afterbirth and the child which remain, and the procedure is then at an end.
Finally, I'm going to describe a third trimester induced abortion, which is performed at 25 weeks to term. At this point, the baby is almost fully developed and viable, meaning he or she could survive outside the womb if the mother were to go into labor prematurely. Because the baby is so large and developed, this procedure takes 3 or 4 days to complete. On day 1, the abortionist uses a large needle to inject a drug called digoxin. Digoxin is generally used to treat heart problems, but a high enough dosage of digoxin will cause fatal cardiac arrest. The abortionist inserts the needle with the digoxin through the woman's abdomen or through her vagina and into the baby, targeting either the head, torso, or heart. The baby will feel it. Babies at this stage feel pain. When the needle pierces the baby's body and the digoxin takes effect, the life of the baby will end. The abortionist then inserts multiple sticks of seaweed called laminaria into the woman's cervix. They will slowly open up the cervix for delivery of a stillborn baby. While the woman waits for the laminaria to dilate her cervix, she carries her dead baby inside of her for 2 to 3 days. On day 2, the abortionist replaces the laminaria and may perform a second ultrasound to ensure the baby is dead. If the child is still alive, he administers another lethal dose of digoxin. The woman then goes back to where she is staying while her cervix continues to dilate. If she goes into labor and is unable to make it to the clinic in time, she will give birth at home or in a hotel. In this case, she may be advised to deliver her baby into a bathroom toilet. The abortionist then comes to remove the baby and clean up. If she can make it to the clinic, she will do so during her severest contractions and deliver her dead son or daughter. If the baby does not come out whole, then the procedure becomes a D&E, a dilation and evacuation, and the abortionist uses clamps and forceps to dismember the baby, piece by piece. Once the placenta and all the body parts have been removed, the abortion is complete. Late-term abortions have a high risk of hemorrhage, lacerations, and uterine perforations, as well as a risk of maternal death. Future pregnancies are also at a greater risk for loss or premature delivery due to abortion-related trauma and injury to the cervix. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Dr. Anthony Levatino, and in the early part of my career as an OBGYN, I performed over 1,200 abortions. One day, after completing one of those abortions, I looked at the remains of a preborn child whose life I had ended, and all I could see was someone's son or daughter. I came to realize that killing a baby at any stage of pregnancy for any reason is wrong. I want you to know today, no matter where you're at or what you've done, you can change. Make a decision today to protect the preborn. Thank you for your time.
We welcome our distinguished witnesses today. Do you and each of you swear that the testimony that you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? And I'll now begin by introducing today's witnesses. The first witness is Dr. Anthony Levatino. Dr. Levatino is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist. Over the course of his career, Dr. Levatino has practiced obstetrics and gynecology in both private and university settings, including as an associate professor of OBGYN at the Albany Medical College. And Dr. Levatino, we'll begin with you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to get right to it. Second trimester D&E abortions performed between roughly 14 and 24 weeks of gestation. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches. And she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks. She's asleep on an operating room table. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and after removing laminaria, you introduce a suction catheter into the uterus. This is a 14 French suction catheter. If she were 12 weeks pregnant or less, basically the width of your hand or smaller, you could basically do the entire procedure with this. But babies this big don't fit through catheters this size. After suctioning the amniotic fluid out from around the baby, you introduce an instrument called a Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. The business end of this clamp is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. There are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. Reach in again, pull out an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you. And use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head on the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. You can't see it, but you pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you could pull out skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times. Sometimes the little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations, you just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose.
You are not alone. There are loving alternatives to abortion. On your screen, you'll see organizations ready to support you with care and compassion. In the description section, you'll find these resources also. There are people who want to help you. Reach out to them.
Margaret Sanger's view from her book Pivot of Civilization, page 100. Put it on the screen. Let's continue to see the mind of this woman who brought the world abortion on demand and birth control and things like that. She's held up as a hero to a lot of people, but a lot of people have no idea that there was an agenda behind her wanting birth control distributed. There was an agenda behind the abortion movement that people need to know about. Because it's labeled today as a woman's right to choose, but choose what? What are you choosing? Are you choosing to be part of her agenda? Unknowingly. You need to know, because she played a big part in what happened back then. Pivot of Civilization is one of her books, page 100 and 101, highlighted section. Let's see what she had to say. It said the actual danger can only be fully realized when we have acquired definite information concerning the financial and cultural costs of those classes to the community. When we become fully cognizant of the burden of the imbecile upon the whole human race. When we see the funds that should be available for human development, for scientific, artistic, and philosophic research being diverted annually by hundreds of millions of dollars to the care and segregation of men, women, and children who never should have been born. Ladies and gentlemen, back when Margaret Sanger was alive, who were and what was the race of the people who were being segregated? People say Margaret Sanger was not a racist. She said the people who were, all the money's being diverted to have them segregated from the rest should have never been born. This is her own words, folks. This is the stuff that was feeding Adolf in Germany. Henry Ford gave him the idea of hating the Jewish people, hating them. And Margaret Sanger was feeding him the ideas through the eugenics movement that if you don't like a group of people, to round them up and kill them off. And if you don't know how the piece of the puzzle fit, you're seeing it now. She just said here the people who were being segregated back then should not have even been born. What right does she have to say that black people don't have a right to be born? What right does she have to say? Now again, she had the right to speak. But to use the platform that she had to spread this kind of hatred is wrong. Do you believe that every poor woman that gets pregnant is going to give birth to a child who's also going to grow up to be poor, who is then going to give birth to children who are going to grow up to be poor, and it's going to be this cycle of poverty? Doesn't have to be. Because I can tell you a story right now about a poor lady back in the 1960s who got pregnant. She already had 3 kids. She had a miscarriage. Now she's pregnant again. People today would say she should get an abortion. How many of you would say she should get an abortion? Just be honest. How many of you would say she should get an abortion? She's already got 3 kids. She can barely take care of the 3 she's got. Now she's pregnant with a 4th. How many of you say she should get an abortion? You don't want to bring that kid into this world. It's going to be poor. Live in an old rundown house. Bathroom is all busted up. The plumbing in the bathroom is all busted up. They got to wash up in the kitchen sink. And somebody was nice enough to put an outhouse in the backyard. It's like a porta potty, we call them today. It was a wooden outhouse in the backyard so they could do their business. And then somebody got to go out there at the end of the day and take that nasty pot full of poop and pee and find some way to pour it out. And in the wintertime, that porta potty gets pretty cold. How do I know? Because that poor woman was my mom. Was I born in poverty? Yeah, I was. Am I in poverty now? No. I work my butt off on my job in construction. I make decent money. But I was born poor. But you leave the people like Margaret Sanger, I would not have been born at all. And there are people out there that say their lives have been touched because of stuff that I've done. But I couldn't do it if I wasn't here. If I'd never been given a chance to live. And my understanding that a lot of these abortion clinics are located in the poor neighborhoods by design, because that's how Margaret Sanger wanted it. Let's see what else it says here. Notice the title at the top of 101 of Margaret Sanger's book, Pivot of Civilization. The feeble-minded. She talked down about people who she felt was not to her level, which would have been anybody who wasn't Caucasian for the most part. Look at what she says here. It says the emergency problem of segregation and sterilization must be faced immediately. Sterilization? Sterilization? Making a person where they can't have a child? That's what she pushed. Let's keep reading. Every feeble-minded girl or woman of the hereditary type, especially of the moron class, should be segregated during the reproductive period. Otherwise, she is almost certain to bear imbecile children, who in turn are just as certain to breed other defectives. Do you hear this language? And this woman is held up as a hero to the Democrat Party in America. And there's Hitler gobbling it up. And he's going to regurgitate it all over the world and cause a lot of people to die because of it. we're learning about Margaret Sanger, one of the big influencers back in that day. Margaret Sanger had something called a plan for peace. Be careful when eugenicists start talking about peace, because they have a different definition than you and I have. A different definition of what you and I have of peace. This is by Margaret Sanger, April 1932, from her Plan for Peace, published in the Birth Control Review. This is what it says. You ready? It's 2 pages. I'm going to read it out. And I want you to understand that this is the lady who influenced a lot the Nazis, Adolf, her movement, the Democrat Party today, and a lot of young people who look at what Margaret Sanger brought into the world that we call today abortion, and they don't understand. Her reason for bringing this whole birth control thing and abortion thing in was not about a woman's right to choose. The American Medicine article she put in her newspaper did not say that birth control was about a woman's right to choose. It said, "More children for the fit, less for the unfit. That is the chief issue in birth control. The emphasis is on control rather than on prevention." It's about, in her mind, getting rid of those people who she felt was unfit to live. Which, if you're watching this video, most likely you fit in that category, and so do I. If it was left to her, we would have never lived. If it was left to her and you're alive, wait till you read what she says here is her plan for peace. What she would have had planned for you and me. Because the fuse is already lit, folks. We better find a way to shut this time bomb off. Because the young people have already had it in their mind to push forward this woman's agenda. Do you know one of the big funders of the trans movement today? Planned Parenthood. Why? Margaret Sanger was about population control. And listen to what her plan is as she took the time to write it out. Let's read it. If people think I'm lying, it's right here. Plan for Peace, Margaret Sanger, published in the Birth Control Review, which was Margaret Sanger's newspaper, April 1932. A Plan for Peace. Let's read what it says. First, put into action President Wilson's 14 points, upon which terms Germany and Austria surrendered to the Allies in 1918. Second, have Congress set up a special department for the study of population problems and appoint a Parliament of Population. The directors representing the various branches of science, this body to direct and control the population through birth rates and immigration, and to direct its distribution over the country according to national needs consistent with taste, fitness, and interests of individuals. That's just the beginning. A government control board is what she wants. That's going to tell you and I whether we can have kids or not. But how are they going to stop us? Oh, she's got that covered too. It said the main objectives of the Population Congress would be A, to raise the level and increase the general intelligence of population. B, to increase the population slowly by keeping the birth rate at its present level of 15 per thousand, decreasing the death rate below its present mark of 11 per thousand. Keeping the birth rate the same. How do you do that? She's going to show you. C, to keep the doors of immigration closed to the entrance of certain aliens whose condition is known to be detrimental to the stamina of the race. You see it on your screen, folks. I didn't make this up. The race? Okay, let's keep going. Such as feeble-minded, idiots, morons, insane, syphilitic, epileptic, criminal, professional prostitutes, and others in this class barred by the immigration laws of 1924 were clearly, you heard her say to Mike Wallace what she had to say concerning people who she feel are not even fully human. You're getting an idea of who this lady is and what she pushed. Let's keep going. She wrote this. I didn't write this. I'm just reading what she wrote so that you will know, because she was a major player in the days of Rutherford and the Nazis and all this. Let's keep going here. Letter D. To apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is tainted, or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring. Forced sterilization. Forced sterilization. This lady who brought you Planned Parenthood, by the way, guys. This lady who brought you Planned Parenthood. Let's keep going. E. To ensure the country against future burdens of maintenance for numerous offspring as it may be born of feeble-minded parents, by pensioning all persons with transmissible disease who voluntarily consent to sterilization. Again, wanting to sterilize people where they can't reproduce. Letter F. To give certain dysgenic groups of our population their choice of segregation or sterilization. Are you guys seeing a pattern here? Segregation or sterilization. When you see what they mean by segregation, some of you are going to be taken back. You better understand the language they use, because they do not speak plainly all the time. Letter G. To apportion farmlands and homesteads for these segregated persons where they will be taught to work under competent instructors for the period of their entire lives. They call that slavery. But they didn't want to use the word slavery. Put them on the farm. What do they say here? Homesteads to be taught to work under competent instructors, slave masters, who are not going to allow you to leave the farm. You're not going to be allowed to leave. You got to stay there for the rest of your life, and you're not allowed to reproduce. This is what Margaret Sanger pushed. This is what she believed in. She goes further. It says that the first step would thus be to control the intake and output of morons, mental defectives, and epileptics. Again, listen to how she talks about people. The second step would be to take an inventory of the secondary groups, such as illiterates, paupers, unemployables, criminals, prostitutes, dope fiends, classify them in special departments under government medical protection, and segregate them on farms and open spaces as long as necessary for the strengthening and development of moral conduct. Take these people, according to her, and make them slaves on the farm until they die. You heard Margaret Sanger with Mike Wallace make the statement that she believed that these people come out of the womb as criminals. You heard it yourself. Now you're seeing what her ideas were. She played a part during this time. We think the Nazis got the idea to round people up. They didn't have farms, they had camps. She said to work them till they die. The Nazis would work them till they died. They'd gas some, they'd shoot some, and they'd work some till they died. They'd do medical experiments on people while they're still alive. They were pushing forward Margaret Sanger's agenda. And don't think it can't happen again. Videos like this can get me canceled. And all I've done was quote Margaret Sanger. These aren't my beliefs. In 1939, there was something called the Negro Project. That's a name that they use for it. The Negro Project. Because there were some black people who didn't feel really comfortable about this whole birth control, population control thing. So they initiated something called the Negro Project. Let's read about it. Put it on the screen. It said racism, then as now, is not a Southern problem. Indeed, the tendency to project it exclusively upon the South has been a device of Northern racism. In 1939, the Birth Control Federation of America, that's the organization that Margaret Sanger ran, by the way, before they called it Planned Parenthood. In 1939, the Birth Control Federation of America responded to the cooperativeness of Southern states' public health officials, designed a Negro Project, arguing that Southern poverty is a major national problem and one which should be ameliorated through birth rate reduction. Not by helping the black man and the poor white and the poor this group and the poor that group, not by helping them get better, get more educated so they can make more money, so they can better their lives like I had to do. Born poor, but I'm not poor now. I'm not rich either, but I'm working on it. Her idea is we got these poor blacks in the South. So her solution, we just read about it. Segregate, which is what they were doing back then. But there was a lot of black folks that wasn't going along with this. So what were they going to try to do to get the black population to go along with Margaret Sanger's agenda? Watch this. This project was a microcosm of the elitist birth control programs who eliminated the possibility of popular grassroots involvement in birth control as a cause. The mass of Negroes, argued the project's proposal, particularly in the South, still breed carelessly and disastrously, with the result that the increase among Negroes, even more than among whites, is from that portion of the population least intelligent and fit and least able to rear children properly. The project was to hire 3 or 4 colored ministers, preferably with social service backgrounds and with engaging personalities, to travel through the South and propagandize for birth control. Propaganda is what the news media does. They give you one-sided news. It's either one-sided from the left or it's one-sided from the right in many cases. But they're not giving you right down the middle, telling you exactly what's going on. They wanted to hire black preachers to do the dirty work, to go into the black community and convince black people that what they needed to do was to stop having kids. The most successful educational approach to the Negro is through religious appeal, they said. They did research and found out if you really want to reach the black community, you can reach them through the so-called black church. I don't think there's such thing as a black church or white church. It's either the church or it's not. I'm thankful that the church I go to, number one, is King James. Preaching, using, don't use nothing else but. And it's an interracial church with a lot of interracial couples in it. And I hope someday when I finally find a wife, I'm looking for somebody that's not my race. I've always been that way since I was young. It's just a preference. So don't get mad at me, because a lot of ladies who are my race get mad at me when they realize that my preference is ladies who are a different race than me. But they understood that the black community tends to be tied and embraces their church, and they trust their minister. So their idea was to go and to get these ministers to propagandize the black community to stop having kids, to start taking birth control, to push forward Margaret Sanger's agenda. Look at what it says here. As Sanger wrote in a private letter, "We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population. And the minister is the man that can straighten that idea out if it ever occurs in any of their more rebellious members. The ministers would enlist the aid of black physicians who are expected to offer their service gratis, and would attempt to organize a Negro birth control committee in each community." Let's keep reading. Next highlighted section. It says here, Mary Lasker wrote in a private memo called Colored Steering Committee, "There's a great danger that we will fail because the Negroes think it is a plan for extermination." Listen to what they say next. You ready? "Hence, let's appear to let the colored think it run it, as we appeared to let the South do the conference at Atlanta." So what is she saying? See, a lot of the black people are thinking this is a program to exterminate the black population. And she's saying, yeah, it is, but we're not going to tell them that's what it is. That's exactly what it is, but we're not going to tell them that's what it is. We'll just lead them to think that that's not really what we're doing, when that's actually what they're doing. And they actually put it in writing. Here's where Margaret Sanger comes in and joins the Negro Project. Next highlighted section. Eventually, Sanger and Mary Lasker revised the project to include hiring a doctor. Gamble agreed to a subsidy to the local colored doctor to put his weight behind the new regime. They were able to push this agenda forward by paying off the people who could be paid off to push forward Margaret Sanger's agenda. Her agenda was picked up by the Nazis, who had the power to implement it, and they did. The end result? Over 6 million Jewish people died. Millions of others died. A bunch of gypsies died. A bunch of communists died. A few hundred Jehovah's Witnesses died. There were some born-again Christians there, some Baptists, Catholics, and others were also rounded up during this time as the Nazis pushed forward the eugenics program. And Margaret Sanger was one of the big voices during this time that was promoting eugenics. That's why I added her in this video, so you guys would know who she was, her mindset, and one of the things that really helped to motivate the Nazis to do what they did. I don't want to leave you guys on a low note, though. I don't want to leave you guys on a low note. It wouldn't be right. Give me 5 minutes. There's hope in the midst of all this. The people that we're talking about, Henry Ford, Rutherford, William Jennings Bryan, Margaret Sanger, Adolf, the Nazis. We're not dealing with people who were King James Bible preaching, King James Bible believing people. We're dealing with people who are operating in the flesh, not in the spirit. And because they're operating in the flesh, the best the flesh can bring you ultimately is death. Ultimately, that's the best it can bring you. Rutherford and his atheism didn't help him out one bit. Atheism offers you no hope. Where's your hope for after you die? Margaret Sanger couldn't offer you any hope. She wanted people to die by the millions. I had a lot more I wanted to read, but the video's long enough as it is. But in some of the writings, she talked about the idea of rounding up people by the millions, separating them from everybody else. All they can give you is death, ultimately. But I'm thankful that I have a God named Jesus that I learned about in this King James Bible, who teaches me about life and lets me know that beyond this life there is another life. It's better than this one. This body managed to get cancer, and thank the Lord I found it early. But I got to keep an eye on it to make sure it doesn't come back. But this Bible promises me that on the other side, I'm going to be given another body. That body doesn't get sick, doesn't get tired, doesn't get hungry. It doesn't die. And Jesus promised when he left this world that he was going away to prepare a place for us. He said, in my Father's house there are many mansions. If it was not so, I would have told you. There's a life beyond this life. And it's a far better one than this one. People say, aren't you afraid they're going to come after you for a video like this? Nah, afraid for what? The worst they can do is kill me. And if they kill me, I'm going home. So what have I lost? But my Bible says, for him who much is given, much is required. And as a 50-plus-year-old man who grew up in a society that actually taught the children, instead of a society where the kids are indoctrinated, I feel I have an obligation as an American to stand here while I still have freedom that's quickly being censored away, by the way, by social media and the government. So while I still have the chance to speak, I need to speak so that you'll know. Jesus came that we might have life and that we might have it more abundantly. If you had an abortion, I'm not attacking you. What's done is done. You can't go back and change it. But as you saw at the end of that video, there are a lot of organizations out there that are willing to talk to you, to help you, to embrace you. And I'm one of the people that's willing to embrace you. I'm not going to judge you because of what happened back there. No. Jesus can clean all that up. That's the good thing about it. He can clean it all up. He can take all your sin, and though it be as scarlet, the Bible says, he can make it white as snow. That baby who was aborted is in heaven now. This book guarantees it. If you want Jesus, you want forgiveness of sins, you don't got to do nothing religious. Just pray and ask him to forgive you your sins. He already knows what you've done. Just confess it to him. Jesus said, whoever cometh unto me, I'll in no wise cast him out. Just confess. Admit you did it. Admit you sinned. Ask him to forgive you your sins. To fill you with his Spirit. So that you'll want to do the right things. And receive the love that he died to give us. And understand that in this world, it ain't going to get better and better, folks. The Bible says it's going to get worse and worse. It's going to get worse and worse, not better and better. But when our lives are done down here, my King James Bible tells us that for us who are Christians, who have trusted in Jesus Christ and not our own works for forgiveness of sins, he's made a place for us in heaven. I hope to see you there. I hope to see you there. And lastly, before I leave, for those of you who are XJWs and you're looking for ways of reaching your friends and family to try to get them out of the cult, feel free to check out my interactive ebook, The Whistleblower's Lighthouse, available at www.jasonzelda.xyz, www.jasonzelda.xyz. It's available for any price you want to pay, over $3. You want to pay $3, you want to pay $20, $25, $100, whatever you want to pay, you're free to pay it there, whatever you think it's worth. More than 500 pages of an interactive ebook for you to use to reach your friends and family and get them out of the cult. And lastly, if you guys appreciate the work that I do and the videos that I make, and you have it on your heart that you want to contribute something to try to help out, feel free. There'll be a QR code on the screen as I'm speaking, and also down in the description section there will be a link to a donation page where you can send whatever you like. And also down in the description I will leave the YouTube page for the Watchtower History Channel with Jeff and Paul, where they have hundreds of videos they're exposing the Jehovah's Witness code as well. That's it for this video, folks. I hope you'll come back for the next video as we get into more of the things that led up to the Jehovah's Witnesses' self-inflicted wounds, getting themselves in trouble with the Nazis. We're going to deal more with that in the next video. So until next we meet, folks, I'll see you guys down the road. Night, everybody.